Some things to talk about.
Gotta watch our language.
So
Well,
now
there
the
was-
recording's going, so
There are
watch the
some, there are some in the country, Gary, who use that term, the People's Republic, to apply to the whole state of Massachusetts.
It's interesting because it's also applied in the Bay Area, immediate Bay Area, to Berkeley,
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
the People's Republic of Berkeley.
And it's been applied to Santa Monica too.
Is that right?
Right. You know, speaking of Santa Monica, if I might just diverge and take our conversation a little bit in a different direction. I know that several of us have been following this series, The Chosen, online. And I did a little background hunting to find out who the consultants were. You have to work a little bit, not too much.
Mhm.
And it's fairly interesting. One is a Catholic priest who is in residence at Santa Monica and whose full-time ministry is filmmaking. He's Holy Cross with
Yeah,
degree.
Dave.
You know who he is, Thomas?
Yeah, I know him. I know him fairly well. You know, he was also the head of what do they call it? The Rosary Hour. The thing that Father Peyton started.
Yeah.
Was it Willie Raymond?
No,
After him, the one
Okay,
after him.
because
Yeah.
Willie, you know,
I'll be right back.
those Holy Cross fathers are here at Stonehill.
Hmm.
And Willie Raymond used to be the one, and he's here at Stonehill. I know Willie pretty
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to think of his last name. Dave begins with a G, I think. And then the last couple of, well, at least one season, they had Bishop Barron.
Yeah.
I haven't
was the
watched
one
any
who
of the third season, but
boycotted,
I need to do a little binge watching.
And so binge watching, have any of you been watching the C-SPAN, the votes in the
yes.
House of Representatives?
CNN, I watch it.
Right.
Yeah. They're in the 12th
Well,
now. McCarthy
yeah,
has flipped a couple of hardliners, but apparently he's going to lose again. They
yeah,
say.
there's 6, as of this minute, there are 6 negative votes. It's been, to me, as a political scientist back in the day, it's a fascinating look, I think, for the American public who will want to watch it into, you know, how the mechanics of the House of Representatives works. I've had a neighbor ask me, well, Donald Trump couldn't be speaker, could he? And I told her, yeah, he could be speaker. George Crook could be speaker.
Wow, that would be.
That would be
Yeah.
great. George
scary
Cook,
to
yes.
Bangs would be
Jim Almy
better.
could be speaker.
But I think, yeah, and it's been repeated over and over again by the by the moderate to liberal media, is it just shows the power and the stubbornness of these 5 or 6 ultra right people like Matt Gaetz from Pensacola, Florida, or the girl from Colorado. I mean, it's just they've dug in, and it's an interesting exercise in a way for that they don't answer to McCarthy. They answer to their constituents who voted them in spite of all of the crap that's going on.
Yeah.
You know, Matt Gaetz is under investigation for sex trafficking and all that kind of stuff. And so, they're looking at this and saying, what do I have to lose by being stubborn? And it's just fascinating. Yeah.
Well, Lauren Boebert just got reelected by 32 votes. So she's not coming from a position of strength.
Is that right?
Well, even worse, what do you think the rest of the world thinks about us?
Right.
You know how often, we've made fun of the Italians, or how much we've made fun of the Brits because they had 2 or 3 prime ministers in a couple of months this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here it is, as Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are telling the world that democracy has had its day, this is how it's presenting itself to the world.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you had Biden and McConnell over there in Kentucky for this bridge that was the result of bipartisan legislation, and they did that on purpose to kind of show, kind of a counter image. But of course, it isn't as public as the one that we're looking at now.
Yeah.
It's-
Well,
Did anybody see the email I sent out this morning?
Yes. Yeah, I read
A
those.
link to John Allen's article
Yeah,
about
that was very interesting.
comparing the Vatican or the Catholic Church really with what's happening in the House of Representatives. And
no.
Didn't have a chance to read it, Tom.
I thought the key thing was both of these are showing the inability of major institutions to handle diversity.
Yes, yes. John Allen's article was great.
Yeah. And then that coalition of canceled priests.
Oh, yeah.
What is that about? Boy.
What is that? Tell me what that is.
Well, it's a group of supporters of these guys like Altman and
Romero.
Pavone, who have been basically ousted from ministry by their bishops. And they're doing a West Coast tour. But speaking.
And they're also were at one point in negotiations to buy a former Franciscan monastery in northern Wisconsin to provide a home for these guys.
Wow.
Well, maybe we can invite them on our next website, our next
There
you go.
Zoom call. If they're over visiting with you, Tom and Johnny and George, Ned, why don't we get them on?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry,
As an
I-
alternative, Tim.
All
as
I
an
misplaced their email address. I can't do that.
Tim, as an alternative, we'll give them your phone number, Tim.
Very very politic reply, Tom.
If we,
Yeah.
I would bet a lot that if we invite them, they will come.
yeah.
Yeah.
Any forum that they can get people.
And I would bet a lot there won't be much conversation.
No,
There'll be a lot of rents.
Probably
That's-
not.
that's the thing, I think that, when I read that article by John Allen, what I'm seeing what's happening there, which I see what's happening I thought the article with Commonweal, I read the article, I worked through the article, but it's the article is very well done. But Ratzinger himself was always difficult to understand. I remember a priest, Tom Madden, who was in the Archdiocese of San Francisco, head of Valnombrosa Retreat House at one time. Ratzinger, when he was still cardinal, came out and he visited there, and there was some sort of gathering of priests, and he might have given a talk. And Tom said he was talking to another priest who said, Tom said, I can't understand him. And the guy said, well, I know his German is not easy his accent is not easy to understand. And Tom said, no, I can understand him that way. I just can't understand what he's saying, what his thinking is. I think, Fred, you're laughing, but Ratzinger was I don't know much about it, but it seems to me he's very hard to understand. And that article I thought was very, very well done, and I found difficulty understanding the article. But trying to say that his hermeneutic of reform included discontinuity as well as continuity.
Yeah.
So, but these people who are very right, if you want to say it, to me, they're fundamentalists. You can't, and that's on both sides, left and right. Once they have their mind made up, there's nothing is going to change them. Nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of an emotional mindset than it is any kind of a rational
I think so.
understanding.
So are you still talking about Ratzinger or the House of Representatives?
Well, that's,
Yes, the answer is
Oh,
yes.
that's John Allen's point.
Yes, that's the answer. Is yes.
Yeah, I had a couple of reactions to the article. The first one was, given the timing of it, I was recalling, that phrase, "Nicol de mortuis nisi bonum," not a bad word about the dead. And so part of me said, if I reread this in 6 months, and I read it carefully, and I basically liked what he had to say, and I could follow most of it. But if I reread it in 6 months or a year or 18 months, would I feel a little bit differently? So that was one kind of image running in my head. And a second one, it was more powerful, was an image of Pope Benedict early on, wearing his red Gucci pumps, contrasted with Francis's broken down old shoes that he eventually found a cobbler in Rome who could repair them rather than go out and replace it. And that was the more powerful of the images that stays with me. You know, that I could never escape how much, in some ways, Ratzinger had been in line for the ecclesiastical papabile hope chest all of his professional career.
Yeah.
And so his whole orientation to becoming, you know, Pope and in many ways looking like a prince, you know, looking like a prince. And the contrast with Francis, who from kind of an inside track, and I tend to believe it, of the election, that in fact Francis had turned down being elected Pope the first time around, and he promised sort of like, if there's another chance or something. And I don't know whether that's mythical, but it feels potentially right on to me. And the difference in style, you know, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus really for? You know, he's for the poor. And in that sense, Francis in every way embodies. And so,
But then,
Bob, now that you've drawn that contrast, Tom was talking about the article, one of the articles, saying that on Pope Francis's eulogy, I guess it was, and you said that Tom, at least I think he did, that you could feel the spirit in his words. You could it was palpable. And there are also articles about the great disappointment that conservative officials were feeling. How does that? How do you see that? The contrast.
Toss that out to everybody.
well, what, Ned? That 96-year-olds tend to die?
No.
What's that?
Francis is a shepherd, and Benedict was relishing his position, and is so dear to the conservatives that they think Francis did him dirt in his eulogy.
Well, I think for the likes of Rod Dreher and those other conservatives who have just excoriated Francis for that relatively brief homily, nothing that he said would have pleased them.
Yeah, that's true. That is very
If
true.
he had lauded him with all kinds of encomiums, it would have rung false, and they would have been the first to say, you know, well, he's lying. So I personally think Francis, you know, Rod Dreher apparently is quoted as saying that it was kind of an off-the-shelf homily that you could find in any homiletics book. I don't agree with that, but I just thought it was a very beautiful, poetic, mystical, even reflection on a good but flawed man.
But it's showing the divide that exists in our country, the divide that exists in the church, the divide, so many ways that exist in the world that we live in today.
Yeah.
And more divisive to me.
So then it's again just an emotional mindset.
I have a nice story to say about Ratzinger, pardon me.
Oh, good.
We need someone like that.
I had a colleague who taught at BC. He's an Englishman, and after he left BC, he went to one of the British universities to teach religion, theology. And when Thatcherissima wanted to cut costs at a university that he worked at, it was Canterbury, and the other thing that's hyphenated with Canterbury. Two of his junior colleagues, this person named Hamish Swanson, two of his junior college were going to get thrown to the dogs, so to speak. And he knew that they had families and what a bad situation they would be in. So he gave up his position so that they could stay. Anyway, this same Hamish, after he left the university, decided to, he had been a kind of spiritual director for the Redemptorists in Scotland. And being in that context, he realized that he would like to write biographies of the founders, of the fathers, sisters, brothers of the Redemptorists. So he was in Rome living with the Redemptorists. And I'm sorry, he was at dinner one night when Ratzinger came for dinner, and his purpose in coming for dinner was it was when he was on that committee for the doctrine of the faith, was to advise the moral theologian there, and I can't remember his name, that he was going to be called before that group. And he wanted to tell him what to do. And he said, there are people on my committee who want to hurt you, but I just want you to change a couple of sentences. And he advised them what to do and what to say when he gets before those other guys. The usual high ecclesiastical bastards. So, but Ratzinger wasn't one of them.
No, he wasn't.
Let me get this straight. Ratzinger came to dinner with the Redemptorists to advise this theologian how to answer when he was called on the carpet.
Yes. And he wasn't saying that. He was really worried about people falling away from the faith, people with authority and so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of overreacted to that. But I thought it was a helpful thing to hear that story, that he wanted to help that man who was going to be in trouble coming before the Holy Office, what used to be the Holy Office, and to tell him what to do, and to point out the difference between himself, who's a fairly wonderful human being, in comparison to those other guys on the doctrine of the faith group. So I thought that was a lovely story. And
Sure.
the other thing is, when I heard about his death, I realized that years ago I had read one of his writings called Caritas in Veritate, and
Beautiful work.
and I thought, well, I'm going to take a look at that again. And so I did read it, I think yesterday. And I thought it was really a lovely document.
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Hey, Norm, you and I are on the same track.
I agree with that. I agree with that, Fred. He used it frequently, quotes from it. when I was teaching business ethics,
Oh, nice.
because he had an insight, into the business world as being kind of congenitally unwilling to go out and see ethical insight into what they were doing. It wasn't a condemnation. It was a very, I thought it was a very, Ratzinger was a human being. In the first volume by Seewald, he says at one point that his time as a curate in a small town in Germany when he was a young priest was the best time of my life. And I'm kind of proud that something that never gets mentioned with respect to these popes, except for Francis, that he's a Jesuit, but Ratzinger was a diocesan priest with a vocation to the life of the intellect. But I'm not sure, and I also think as a human being, my observation of him is that he was a kind of a fragile man. Not fragile in the sense of, being afraid, as just a kind of a sensitivity to things in life, to art, to culture, to music, to theology, to his relationship with God, that was kind of tender and lacy-like and that kind of thing. And there are things about him, for example, his intervention, of course, using the platform of Cardinal Frings at the Second Vatican Council on Verbum Dei is one of the most important things that was done at the Second Vatican Council. The document that was presented was called De Fontibus Revelationis. The first chapter was the fonts of revelation. And Ratzinger went to Frings and said, well, what about the Word of God? Shouldn't we be talking about that before we talk about the fonts of the Word of God? And so the first chapter is called the Word of God. And repeated in his life, that was a very, very, and that became the basis, for instance, afterwards when Latourell, my old professor, and Fred Adam as well, and Bob, wrote a book in which he said that the Word of God, in the Word of God, the scriptures are secondary. The event is primary. And I found that enormously helpful pastorally. I used to tell people in my parish that if you want to come and read the scriptures in breaking bread or whatever beforehand, so that you have some sense of what it's about, please do that. But when they're being proclaimed in the church, put the book down, because there's an event, there's a presentation, something happening. And I think that's only one instance in which I think I think the other thing about reason and faith, and the fact that he wasn't able to sell that in Europe because of his personality, partially, not completely. I think these are great contributions, and that we get all upset and kind of distracted, by the document on the traditional mass and, how he treated Father Dupuis. I mean, that was horrible, what happened there. But I don't think we can write the man off or write him on because of things like that. So anyway, I have I have two minds about Ratzinger, but there are some things about him that I think were gifts of the church, millennial gifts of the church, to the church.
Well, I always
I could say in that line that, he's really been done a disservice by his most ardent followers.
Yes.
Who basically
right.
used him and continue to use him as the excuse for their own extremism.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, that brings to mind one other thing that has always been a conviction of mine ever since I can remember. Satan, and I do believe in Satan. I don't believe in him like I believe in God or Christ, but you know,
I
that
hope not.
is a personalized force of evil, does not work in people nearly as much as between them.
Hmm.
And, you know, so where you have differences that turn into conflict and polarization and mutual demonization, which is, of course, what's rampant now, you know, that's where the devil just takes delight. You know, I apropos of that, I used to describe the hardest thing that I had to do as a pastor was to try to keep good people from killing one another. And recognizing that, you know, they're both sides are good, but they disagree, and so they have to do away with the other. Metaphorically, usually.
Although I'm Irish, and if my name were McCarthy, I'd tell Kevin we'd be better off if we stayed in Ireland.
Shoot.
Sorry. Fred, you had a comment about Ratzinger that your light was on after a minute ago.
Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay.
I think it was regarding his fragility.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
No, that was Frank. Yeah. Frank, can I ask you a question? And it's off the subject, and you can. So when you say you're teaching business ethics at Northrop Grumman, what would be, and maybe it's not the time to talk, but what would be some of the business ethic issues that you would help the corporation deal with? I mean, you're a huge defense contractor, enormous defense contractor. So what would be some examples of where someone might say to you, hey, Frank, you know, I don't know how what your role was really like in day-to-day operations, but what would be some business ethical issues that would land on your desk? Do you mind sharing that?
No, because it's a shady past, having worked for a defense contractor, but the program basically started out with what I call microethics, which was the behavior of employees and ultimately of executives in terms of taking gifts, shorting hours, lying on your resume so that a contract could be voided because the government wants this kind of person to be working on this issue, etc. There were occasions where it got, bigger issues that should have came up, but the high-ranking people were somewhat afraid of this. Even when it came to accepting gifts from someone, they'd know full well what the policy was, but they'd send a note to me to see if they could intimidate me to say, well, this one time you can do it. So you'd be foolish to say, this is my opinion, so much as the wiser course would be to refer them to the particular policy or procedure, etc. But it did happen at times. For instance, I remember then there was a change in management in business that went from shareholder value, it was called. This was in the 90s. And the traditional business theology, if you will, is that the shareholders that invest in the company so that you make a good product, respond well if it needs to be fixed, have good relationships with the community, treat your employees well, and then as a result of that, make money that you can share with them. Mm-hmm. What shareholder value did was it put the shareholder at the front of the line rather than the back. So in order to maximize shareholder value, you might have to cut corners, mistreat employees, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a conversation one time with a senior executive about that. he almost couldn't understand what I was talking about. So there was occasions like that when big issues would come up, but the major issues was the behavior of employees.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And so you never got into conversations with senior management about what contracts with the federal government should we seek? You know, that.
Well, to some extent, on occasion I did, because fortunately we had a general counsel who would say, for example, that if you're dealing with an overseas agent, he said it would be his role. He often got asked after he gave his opinion that it was legal for them to pursue this particular contract, if he thought it was a good idea. He used to tell me, he thought that was my role to say that, but that he got sucked into it because he was at a level in the corporation that I wasn't at.
Okay.
But that was a good environment to work in, to know that that kind of person was there. Because I could have discussions with him and know, for example, that he understood that other dimension and the fact that it should be in whatever way, not necessarily lecturing them about things, but telling them about the history of this person they were going to think about doing business with, that though it was not legally prohibited by the terms of the contract, it was not a good idea ethically or for some other reason, politically, culturally, whatever.
Do other major corporations have business ethics centers? Ned, did you have one?
We didn't have a business center,
business ethics
center, but we had. I experienced the things that Frank was just talking about with the CEO, not particularly with respect to contracts, but with respect to behavior on their part and the interpretation of that behavior, and whether there was some actionable thing that the guy was doing. For instance, I got a call from a very highly former place officer outside of the oil company, and he said, "I'm going to sue you guys, and I know you can talk with Roger Beach." Roger Beach at the time was the CEO, and I think I've got a winning argument. And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, 2 years ago, Roger and I were standing next to one another at a meeting to celebrate the retirement of one of the major officers. And Roger Beach turned over to me and said, "I'm glad he's leaving, and I'm going to get rid of a lot of other guys like him. They're old, they don't have any imagination, they're just bad for the company, and they're gone. And you, Dave, you're going to be the next director of human relations or human resources. And you're going to do that because you're not going to act like these guys. You're older, I know, but you'll not act like them, will you?"
Here comes Bob Bono.
Oh, that's good.
Go ahead.
And I called Roger Beach, and I said, "Roger, we've got a problem. We've got an issue." And he said, "Is it from Dave?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, I just got a letter from him. I'm glad that he talked with you. What are we going to do about that? I'm not going to be intimidated. We're going to fight him, aren't we? He doesn't have any kind of a case, does he? I said, "Well, did you say these things to him on such and such a date?" And there was this long pause. He said, "Why do I have to answer that question?" And I said, "Because that determines the level of evidence that he has, and he could really hit us hard with several $1 million." And he said, "Can't you find a way out?" Do you remember this, George? Did I tell you about this?
Yeah.
And I said, "Do you want the law department to quibble with the facts and minimize the import of what you said?" And he said, "I just want you to keep that guy away from us." I said, "I can't." And it was one of those times when, Frank, you said, "Well, the wiser way, I believe, to go is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And I did, and he got very furious. And he said, "I'm going to talk to the general counsel." I said, "Well, I'm the senior deputy general counsel, and I'm in charge of the human resources stuff. And he's going to call me and ask me what I think, and he's going to respond to you in this way." And so he hung up on me. And we had stuff like that going on, not frequently, but too many times, when these guys up on top wanted the law department to be their shield. And at one time, I thought that Beach wanted this. He wanted to engage this guy in litigation and just paper him to death with some very good lawyer, outside lawyer.
That sounds like a great idea to me.
Yeah, an outside lawyer wanting to make a whole lot of money from us. Well, he finally relented, but he was very upset, and that had consequences with respect to my position and my salary, that kind of thing.
Tim, you asked about how common was this. Now, I retired from that about 20 years ago, 19, and I was chairman of something called the Ethics Officer Association, which had about 1,200 members. It's now merged with other groups, and so but at the time had 1,200 members. Those were member companies or organizations. Sometimes it was hospitals like Catholic Healthcare. On occasion, it was a university who were members of the Ethics Officer Association. And the basis of that was of having a program. In the defense industry in 1986, the government companies signed up to have a program that was sponsored by the government called the Defense Industry Initiative on Business Ethics and Conduct. And it was voluntary, but basically, if you got into trouble, the defense industry, examined you according to the tenets that were followed by the people who signed up to the voluntary thing. Mm-hmm. So, and then the United States Sentencing Commission, taking off of that 1986 Defense Industry Initiative, built guidelines, sentencing guidelines, so that if you got into a business trouble, like the sentence could be draconian. But if you showed that your company had an effort and a program to avoid that particular kind of activity in the corporation, then it reduced the fine significantly. So there was a whole structure that was, I don't know exactly where it is, it's still there, but I don't know exactly what the whole status is now. But there was a whole structure that got built first around the defense industry and then broadened out to larger business entities.
And so is there such an effort in the Catholic Church for clergy? And I mean religious, secular, is there a big focus on ethics either in seminaries or in ongoing training programs in the church? Does that exist?
Good
I don't
question,
know.
but
I'm not as
meanwhile, I'd
cognizant.
like to welcome Bob Bano and George Farrick,
Hey,
who might
George.
be listening in, but we,
Hey, I'm taking my dog
George.
out for a walk, so I thought I'd log in to listen to what you're talking
George,
about.
is your dog holding the phone?
No, but I think I'd like to train him to do that.
Okay.
No,
Well,
I have
welcome. Yeah,
I have a poop bag in one hand and the phone in the other,
oh my.
so
Well,
it would work out. Yeah.
one
Just
comment.
don't confuse them.
We are our full complement.
Yeah, but I won't be here for too long. I just
Yeah.
wanted to say hello. Wish you all a happy new year.
Same to you, George.
If you're watching on a large screen gallery view, you can probably see all 12 of us.
Yeah,
And here's Moby.
yeah.
Hey,
There's
Moby.
Moby.
13 of
Moby.
us now.
Okay.
Hi there, Moby. That's my friend
Tell him
Moby.
to bark.
No,
What's that?
You have
Tell him to bark and say hello.
he's quiet.
Yeah,
and
he's
you
being
have
quiet.
and George, you have blue skies up there.
Yes.
You certainly do.
Yeah, the Pineapple Express carried me down. You know, where I'm actually in Pasadena.
Yeah,
Ah.
it's,
Oh, okay.
because
Yeah.
it's overcast up here. Is
Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You're gonna get more rain, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Bob
Yes.
Charpentier,
Hi,
is
George.
that either? If Bob were here and I was up there, we'd be going for a walk outside with our dogs.
Yes.
It was
Delightful.
New Hampshire, though.
Delightful times walking. We have right in Kensington is a spectacularly beautiful little pocket park that's managed by the university. 2/3 of it is an actual 6-7 acres of foliage and trees and plants from all over the world, which was given to the university as part of an estate settlement. It used to be a spectacular estate. And the other third of it is a Carmelite monastery that has been there for quite a long time. So between the two places is a very intriguing, interesting place to walk. And the gardens of the Carmelite monastery are walled off, fenced off, but there's a connection between the university forester gardener who manages that and all that, which is kind of intriguing. But it's a very beautiful spot, and we're blessed to have that. And George and I often walk there with our dogs, and I'm lucky enough to be able to have a series of dogs through my volunteer work up at Guide Dogs for the Blind, where I do foster care over in Marin County.
Wow.
And so I can get away from time to time, like I am now, with family here in New England. George, are you still there?
I'm still here. Yep.
Okay. I think they'd love to hear from you, the rest of the group.
Yeah. Is there anything new either of us should know about? Anything?
Either being you or the dog?
Yes.
Yeah,
Tim
I have to
asked a
leave.
question about ethics in the church now.
I see. Yeah. I heard Ned talking about ethics in the corporate structure and Frank's comments and ethics in the church.
And Frank was talking about his own experience before you came on with Northrop Grumman.
Yeah. I don't know why Tim is raising that question.
We really don't have that kind of thing, do we? That kind of review and approval or disapproval or kindly advice, do we?
Not in a
Yeah,
formal, not in a formal way that I know of.
Yeah, we do. It's called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and a certain Cardinal Ratzinger used to run it that way.
Right, and his successor continued to run it that way from my experience too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
good US.
Yeah, what's the basis in the New Testament for that?
What for
Is there any
that-
basis for that?
for that department of the
Now,
of
what
the-
did Jesus say about that?
Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So there's the power. Ah.
I thought that was-
I'm sorry I have to leave, but I have a family reunion. But this is awesome. See you guys later.
Okay,
right.
Norm.
Yeah,
God bless you.
Wish
Hi
your
to your
family
family.
well.
Happy 2023.
We
God bless
love
you.
you.
Yeah, I sent a little message that I'm kind of annoyed at those who are critical of Pope Francis doing such a modest homily and the ceremonies for Pope Benedict, you know. It just shows the different styles of both of them. You know, Pope Francis being a humble, simple guy, and he's more concerned with the direct experience of the Gospels, working with, you know, I think as some of you said, the smell of the sheep. Whereas Pope Benedict, with his little red shoes and etc., was more of the typical medieval type of church ecclesiastical lord. So, yeah, so Francis isn't going to do that type of thing. And I think Pope Benedict probably got a bit wiser as he got older and closer to death too, and maybe preferred what Pope Francis did. Anyway, that's my brief take on it.
Your brief but spectacular take on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
well,
a-
I think the article that I read said that the Pope, that Benedict wanted a more simple ceremony, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yes,
And,
that's true.
yeah. So,
And how do you define simple?
well, I don't know, but apparently it was not, it was too simple for the guys who, like you said, and that was my point about earlier, that Benedict was not always easy to understand, at least from what I gather. I'm not a big reader of all these documents, but I know I had a book that he wrote called The Introduction to Christianity, and I mean, I kept trying to read that thing, and I said, shit, I can't understand 4 sentences that he writes. I mean, I just can't. So there you are. But so these guys, it's not surprising to me that these like you said, the people who've done him a disservice, they don't know really what his real thinking is. You know, and that article that you had us read from Commonweal was saying that he's not understood well. Well, Frank, you said the same thing about John Paul II and that guy Niehaus, those guys who kind of used
Right.
John Paul II's stuff to push their own agenda.
Right.
And that's what these people have done with Benedict, you know.
Right.
Although Benedict put himself in that situation by staying in the Vatican. And I was thinking to myself, I know he really wanted to retire and go to Bavaria and just write. And he could have done that if he resigned as Pope. He could have gone back to Bavaria, but he chose to stay, there, with his white robes as the Pope Emeritus. So,
no, I'll bet his motivation was not really that there. I bet, I don't know. But just think of what he would have done to that small town in Bavaria if he'd moved there. There would have been pilgrimages of all these malcontents.
oh, that's good. I never thought about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Be great for the tourist trade.
Yeah, really good.
Well, what do you
I read while he was Pope, he wrote a Life of Christ in 3 volumes, and I read them, and I thought his style was almost ethereal at times, and somebody else has alluded to that. um, like Gossamer or something.
Mhm. Tragic.
As far as his content went, he didn't seem to know the identity of any American or British scripture scholar. There was not one reference to what's his name, the resurrection scholar.
Well, no.
He's an Anglican. I just can't think of his name.
N.T. Wright?
Yes. I don't think he mentioned N.T. Wright once in his book. Now, how do you have a figure like N.T. Wright and then ignore him in the world of scholarship? I mean, how could you?
Yeah,
I mean,
and what about Elaine Pagels? Yeah.
Well, George, what about her?
Well,
Yeah.
he did in one of he did
Our
in one
favorite
of his
Gnostic.
Yeah,
He
but
did
what
in
is
one of-
Elaine Pagels really? Never mind.
he did in one of his works praise the work of John Paul Meyer
Oh,
in
yeah.
the marginal
did?
Jew. Yes, by name actually.
As well he should have, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
really. I remember Herb Ryan taking a walk, and he said, "I just finished Benedict's or Ratzinger's book on Jesus. I think there were two, weren't there?" And he said he's a Platonist and an inarticulate Platonist at that. You know.
Frank, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say at this very moment, President Biden is giving awards to, some of you may know about this, right? About 12 Distinguished Citizens Awards for example, the Arizona Speaker of the House who testified at the January 6th hearings and some of the Capitol Police. He's giving these awards out, I think, as we are right now at this moment, from what I understand. So it's kind of interesting that he's taking January 6th, the second anniversary.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, of the storming of, our country's center. So anyway, that's going on right now. But anyway, I'm going to have to leave, but I'm glad to have joined you. Carry on, guys.
Hey, George.
Hey,
God
George.
bless.
Bye.
Hi, Moby.
Happy New Year.
Bye, Moby.
Bye, Mobes.
Bob Bono, you have been totally quiet. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine. I
How's your brother?
all set to come online, and then I got a call that's asking me to go down to Texas, and I had to deal with my calendar and somebody else's calendar, so that's what delayed my being here from the beginning. Trying to catch up with a lot of stuff. Major project these days is ruffling through all the paper and documents and stuff that I have and trying to thin them down and get them someplace that they might be of use.
Mm-hmm. You're not going to be part of the coalition of canceled priests West Coast tour, are you?
Haven't heard anything about it.
West Coast tour.
Check out my email. I'd never heard of them either, but it popped up as an ad on Crooks.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
They're very. You see them a lot referred to on things like Church Militant and
I'm sure
those kinds of sites. Yeah.
So get ready, Ned.
Yeah.
I did
Frank,
catch
I have
your
a huh?
Yeah, I did catch your thing, Tom, on it had a bunch of stuff. I didn't get a chance to read it, but you had 2 or 3 things in Altman and some kind of a stance with regard to Altman. I don't know if it's worth discussing that or
well, that's what I was referring to. The coalition of canceled priests. Apparently, it's an organization that they're forming to support these guys like Altman and Pavone and a few others whose names I didn't recognize.
Okay, thank you.
Kalchik. There's a priest in Chicago named John Paul Kalchik, Kalchik. He's one of them as well.
Frank, I was wondering when we were talking about your corporate job all those years, there must have been an interview process for that. What was it about your resume that caused these folks to gravitate towards you?
Well, I don't know, because I started out as actually manager of a group that did graphics and prepared proposals for the government. So I would manage the writers, the graphics people, the engineers were giving input and all that we could put all this together. And then the government came out in 1986 with this requirement for the Defense Industry Initiative. And my boss at the time knew my background and so kind of drafted me for that. But I was at a unit in Massachusetts. Subsequently, that unit got indicted for testing things that took place in a unit that reported to it in Pomona, California, which led to a big interface with the government. So I was the interface with the government in Massachusetts, and then I got transferred to be the interface with the government in New York on Long Island when we bought Grumman, and Grumman had a problem. And then I was transferred to the corporate office in Los Angeles, where I did some of that interface with the government as well as running the program. So it kind of just snowballed. So it wasn't as if, but originally, yes, my original boss, the vice president, put me in charge of it because he knew my background.
I don't think that hurt Ned's background hurt him at all in his ascendance corporately.
George, I can't see you.
George, if you get closer to the mic, it's easier to understand you. And you seem to be on the side of your picture. I don't know. You're not in the middle of it.
And how are you? How are you, George? How are you feeling?
Oh, I feel okay.
Not too tired?
After a while.
Yeah.
But in the near future, as early as next week, lo and behold, I'm going to have this test. And I don't know if it's a defusion or an infusion or what the hell, I don't remember, but it's a test that will determine whether I can undergo treatment, whether I'm strong enough, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And new doctor, part of the old doctor's universe and team. And he said, what we want to do is learn your anatomy, i.e. my anatomy of my innards. And if you're strong enough, then you go on to, there's a simple term. There's a frequent, the injections that are so miraculous, that Father Franz so profited from, remember?
Yes, very much so.
And the guy said,
Gave him years of life.
Yeah. And Betty asked the guy, well, how will we know if they're working? And he says, oh, you'll know.
Oh, no.
He said the scores on the test results are so spectacular. He said, in a week or two, if that's working. And my impression from him was it always does, that can't be true, but he was really a proponent of this. We call it immunotherapy.
Yes.
And John, that kept Father Franz alive for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
So that's what's new with me.
That sounds good. Sounds like a genetic workup that they're
Yeah.
doing and then going to match the treatment protocol specifically to your situation. Thank you for giving us the details of it. And
Oh, you're welcome.
yeah, know that and I suspect the rest of my brothers here hold you in prayer, as my Baptist friends would say. You're right at the top of the list. I
Well,
might
thank
use that
you so
imagery.
much.
Yeah.
Even Almy?
Yeah.
Especially Elmy.
Especially, and so George, if this works, and you have, now this is not a flip question, but it's one that's been on my mind for myself, and you thought you had 5 additional years of life, would you do anything differently?
Well, how strong would I be in those 5 years?
Let's say you're like you are.
Okay.
Maybe stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely become a lot weaker in the last 6 months, year. I don't know the answer to that. Well, no, I wouldn't want to do, stay where I am and everything. I don't know if the answer would be, gee, Betty, maybe we should travel a little, or if it would be something that I could do to help the mission of the church. That's what I had wanted to do. And I was teaching RCIA and had my ears open to the ground for other things that would come up. And then this, and this is a definite interruption on your path to glory. Well, maybe not. Depends how you look at it, I guess. But so that's the best I can do, Tim.
I think that's a great answer, because it's something that, I'm looking at this screen here, and every single one of us is 80. I've been thinking a lot, and maybe it's kind of a New Year's brings it about in my mind, is okay, what am I going to do? I mean, do I have 5 more minutes? Do I have 5 more years? Do I have 2 years? And personally been struck in the last 2 weeks by 3 friends who have died. And it's like, oh, you don't know, you just don't know. And so it's something, and maybe everyone who gets to these passages, I think 80 is a passage. I think 80 is kind of like, it's a big, 40 was nothing, 50 is nothing, but 80 is something. Is like, okay, what am I going to do? What, is there something that I'm being called to do by the Lord that I've not been doing, or that I need to do more of something? And so I'm just saying that's on my mind now. That's why I asked you.
It's the thought too that it might not be 5 years. It could be 20 years.
How many?
20. Ratzinger, Paparazzi died at what, 96? And spent the last 10 years in what we would probably regard as a relatively productive, agree with it or not, relatively productive retirement. Lucid and mentally active to the end. Well, 96 is 16 years for each one of us.
Yeah.
So, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 5 days, it could be 5 years, but it could also be 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of leaving, I just got a text from my daughter, who is having a little bit of a traffic issue with the snow falling here, which means Grandpa needs to go and meet his granddaughter's bus, which is going to be on the corner in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to
Which is part of your fulfilling your vocation.
which is part of my ministry. I think of
Yeah.
it that way, which I love. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I bid you adieu. Catch up with you next time and continue having great conversations. Bye bye for now.
God
Wow.
bless you.
Bless you.
Take care, Bob.
Thank you.
You know,
George
Tim,
Crook, speaking of daughters, I got a call from my daughter Krista yesterday, and she was in a cheery mood and really picked up my spirits. But she asked me, "How is George Crook?" And be sure to say hello from Krista. And
Well, thank you. Whom I'm not sure I would recognize if she came into the room, you know, unless she has family resemblances to you and your ex.
Tim, with respect to your question, what kind of energy do you have? Are you as energetic as you were 20 years ago, 10 years ago? Do you feel able to just get up? I have a question in my mind, and it's causing some anxiety, some concern. What can I do? You know, here I've got a back problem, I've got a knee problem, etc. And they reduce my energy because you have to cope with this stuff.
Well, if you take your meds.
I'll take my meds. That's one of my pet peeves. I hate medication. But what level of energy does one need to do anything significantly socially, so to speak? You know, teach a class, be part of an effective church council, etc. I think energy is a real important thing, and mine is not what I'd like it to be.
Said the 80-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, physically, I mean, knock on wood, I don't know that there's anything wrong with me other than being old. But my idea is, I know that I'm losing my mind, and I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, I know that I am having more and more difficulty every month, every year in understanding things. And that's sad, because I look around and a lot of my friends are older than me, and what they are enjoying so much is they're reading, you know, to be able to read and understand what they're reading, to be able to read Tom's things that he sends out and understand them. And I am very much aware that I think I have some form of creeping dementia. I mean, and so my worry is, okay, what happens when, what ministry can I do and to whom can I give this ministry if I start losing my mental faculties? And so that's my struggle. To be very personal with you guys, that's my struggle. And so I haven't quite come to an understanding of that yet. But I know I need to shit or get off the pot. I don't.
Well, you need to see if you get a diagnosis, or see if there is one.
Well, I think I'm intuitive enough to know that, you know, that something is happening, and it's not dramatic. I mean, I can sometimes carry on an interesting conversation or follow along, but what I need to do is I have this feeling that I wasn't put here at 80 years old. I wasn't kept alive to just sit on my ass and watch C-SPAN, you know, or to read. You know, I kind of have this idea that I need to be out doing something. And so I'm seriously rethinking getting actively involved in hospice again. You know, I've not done it for 4 or 5 months. And it was something that I enjoyed doing. And to go into someone's home who's dying and sit with them for 3 or 4 hours every week, it doesn't take a lot of brain power. I'm going to be honest. You know, it's not it's not like reading one of Fred's weekly summaries. I mean that, and so I'm thinking, well, okay, why? And part of this has been derived from, we've started following Mike Schmitz on Catechism in a Year. And so the question of the today's reading is, why did God create you? You know, why did he create the world? You know, what are you here for? Kind of basic question. And so that's kind of something I'm not struggling, but it really is at the forefront of my mind. It's, why has he kept me alive for 80 years? And so I'll let you know when I have the answer to that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, it does seem to me, Tim, that I mean, if you have a desire to work at hospice, that's where you ought to go. I mean, I'm not a big, I have come to appreciate, and I don't know a lot about it, you know, the Ignatian spirituality. I mean, and one of the ways, you know, at least what Ignatius would say, that one of the ways you know what God would like you to do is what you want to do, is your desire. You know, and I suspect that would be, it seems to me.
What do you mean by that, Gary? I'm not
your desire. You have a desire. You said you love hospice work, and you've been thinking of getting back into it. I would say that might be a sign.
No,
Okay.
the classic St. Ignatius example is he'd had his leg shattered by a cannonball in combat, and the only things to read in this place where he was convalescing were lives of the saints and of Jesus. And he had always loved novels and books about chivalry and all that stuff.
Romance.
And he found that when he would read a book about chivalry and fair ladies whom he could maybe seduce, they left him less satisfied than reading a life of Saint, you know, Adalbert of Topanga or something. And that was he didn't expect it. He said, well, that was a good book, but yeah. But it was, it became a pattern, and his approach was, when he was working out on this discernment, was, well, is God telling me I'm meant more for the spiritual life, if that seems to bring me greater satisfaction, and, you know, hanging out at balls and etc. Right, Gary?
Yeah.
I always thought that was a pretty weak way to go. You know, what about self-deception? But why would you deceive yourself into wanting to be somebody who's giving up all his pleasures? You know.
Well, there's some great books written about Ignatian discernment.
Yeah.
Because there is a danger of becoming too subjective, too self-centered. But on the other hand, you really do need to. I remember when I was trying to make my mind up about staying in the priesthood or getting into the priesthood. I wrote a letter saying I'm ready. I got sent to a different parish as a deacon, and I remember going through the process of what's going on inside of me. What's going on inside of me tells me something about what the Holy Spirit is telling me. What am I more capable of? What are my talents? And so there's this balancing act that goes on, and you pray for the Spirit to help you find what he wants you to do, and it's a subjective thing.
Is there okay, you guys aren't the first. There's a guy in my Cursillo group who really is an endorser of Ignatian processes. Is there something that you might lead me to read about this kind of discernment?
Tim, have you read, there's a book written, I mean, maybe a lot of you have read it. I use it, by James Martin, you know, the Jesuit, very, very well known. And he wrote a book called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything.
Right.
It's really well written, and you know,
It is.
Very
Yeah.
well.
it's a book that I use it as a book study in my parish. I had 40 or 50 people coming, and I think probably of all the things we had ever read, that was a book that most people, at least I certainly found it to be very helpful. I still have it. It's a very easy to understand, well written, I think, description of Ignatian spirituality. You know, and it talks about desire, it talks about discernment, and it talks about like the fundamental principle. He says, you know what, you know, Ignatius boiled down what he said what's the principle and foundation. He said, you know, that our purpose is to eventually be with God, and whatever, whether we have illness or health or we're rich or poor, we need to be indifferent to all that. He used the word indifference, so that whatever it is that we're in, if it leads to that goal, that's where we should be going.
Thank you.
There's a guy by the name of
You'd enjoy the book. It's easy to read. It's interesting. And he's got
Thank you.
great stories. Yeah.
And there are priests just floating around.
Right.
Most Jesuits, but not all, who specialize in directing people.
Yeah.
Through this discernment process, and they're usually pretty good.
There's a great,
you know, about half an hour ago, there descended one of these little blips of the news on my, and then it ascended again. But it said that FDA has just given approval to a drug designed to slow cognitive slowing.
Cognitive what, George?
I don't remember the term.
Cognitive decline.
Decline. Yeah. So
I think it's called getting younger.
well,
that does not necessarily reduce cognitive decline.
That's true.
Just a codicil about something you asked about earlier. Why did God create us? And the general answer is he created us for his glory. And we are to understand that part of that glory is you. You and Sandra and all the rest of us and our families and so forth. And I think that's a lovely way of thinking about our relationship to God.
He wants us to be happy.
True.
I have a couple. Yeah, I have a couple of things, Tim. This is a small little book like this, which is called "What is Ignatian Spirituality?" and it's by a Jesuit priest, David Fleming. It's a bit aged, but let me see if I can find when it was put out. But in any case, I think there's loads of his practices, you know, the whole process that can be lengthy. The other thing, yesterday I was at we have a First Friday Club thing here that on the first Thursday, we call it First Friday Club, but the first Thursday of each month. And we had an Alzheimer's doctor giving talk yesterday. In many respects, it was a little bit hard to follow, but he kept, he had a kind of a folder and he kept turning pages and kind of talking about people that he has dealt with that have lived long into the future. And so he did things like, how old are women? What's the oldest woman in the world today? How old is she? And then he would talk about some of the things that individual did. And then he talked about men, the difference that women tend to be older than men, that we die earlier. than women do. And then, you know, in a certain sense, he didn't give a lot of guidance, but he told all these different stories. But the two things that I picked up, at least this is what I grasped in what he was saying, it's important you keep talking. It's important you keep talking. And it's important that you continue to be active in relations with other people. That's what keeps you alive. And then I think with that is if you know, that you have to stay active. You can't kind of sit on the couch and watch a lot of television. You know, you become very passive. And it's important that you get out and listen to what other people are saying and let that process within you, not that you have to agree with them, but it tickles your brain and makes you think. He also talked about the fact that the whole process of Alzheimer's or dementia, that it's just part of the system. And some it goes the complete route of going down, but that when you reach certain stages of your age, so he said, 60, you're doing good, you're great. 70, start to have some developments. 80, it begins even a little bit more. And so he kind of graphed that with his hands. He didn't put anything up, but all of us are going through declension, if I can put it that way. You know, that we're not functioning on the same level that we're used to. So I find in myself, for example, I can't remember one thing from one day to the next. You know, but the importance of to continue to read, to be active physically, to be active mentally, to read, to pay attention to what's going on, to talk about what's going on with other people, but you don't have to win the dialogue, but the dialogue will make you think more, and it kind of is a positive thing. So those are some of the things that I got out of him. I wish it had been more systematic, but it was just one episode after another that he went through. And it was the biggest luncheon. I think it's the second biggest luncheon our club has ever had. Because I think his specialty is Alzheimer's and dementia. And he kind of talked about that. And he just, in effect, said to people, it's part of life. So don't get too upset about it, but don't just sit and wait for it to kill you.
Right. Yeah.
Be engaged. So I don't know if that speaks to you, Tim, but those are some of the points
No, it really does.
And
it's another thing that Ignatius talks about, and it's sort of a back and forth between consolation and desolation.
Yeah.
And you're kind of on the edge of a feeling of desolation, it sounds like.
I think so.
What desolation really is what one of my fellow parishioners told me. It's an AFOG, another fucking opportunity for growth.
Well, I believe that's Ignatius. What Ignatius would say that whatever the situation is, you know, can be an AFOG. That's very.
I love that. That's
sounds a little bit like FUBAR, huh?
Yeah.
On the other end.
I love the fucking opportunity for growth. That's another one.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the concept, the Ignatian concept of the presence of God everywhere. In everything.
Everything. In everything. That's why, you know, like I preached this last weekend in St. Helena. I said masses there, and I just talked about, you know, in the gospel, you know, the thing that always struck me is how Luke says Mary kept all these things in her heart, and I said, you know, it put me in mind of Ignatius's. In the middle of all of it was going on, she just kept it and pondered it and meditated on it. And I said, it reminded me of Ignatius, the examination of consciousness. You know,
one thing everybody, at least I certainly did before I met Herbert, I had the idea that Saint Ignatius was a kind of like the guy down at Port Royal, the Jansenist, or he's not a saint. Well, anyway, you know, very severe.
Yes.
Didn't smile a lot, didn't laugh a lot. No real time for that. Would never sit there and look at a flower. And all that's wrong.
Yeah.
All that's wrong. He was a very feeling, warm, loving man. And his colleagues and just adored him.
Although James Martin tells a story in his book about some Jesuits saying, I'd rather meet God than Ignatius. No, but he was
demanding too, demanding.
Yeah, but I really, but it struck me that, you know, the examination of consciousness, where you go every in the evening or at a certain period, you play back the day and you look at the day that you've just lived and see, where did you meet God today, you know, and how did you respond? And I mean, and that takes finding God in all things, you know, very seriously, you know.
Yeah, whereas the I guess the Vicentian version, or at least, was, how did I screw up the last half a day, you know?
Of conscience, yeah, examination of conscience rather than consciousness. Yeah, exactly.
Does anyone write about the advantages of turning 80?
I think there are advantages.
Explain some more, Frank.
Well, aren't there some positive things of getting old?
Senior discounts, I guess.
Well, I've been getting those since 62. I'm used to that now. I mean,
yeah.
But
well, a couple other things that he said. Your question, Frank, accents another part of it. One of his dimensions, he talked about the importance of dancing and the importance of music. And he, with regard to the music thing especially, talked about that music will reach anybody inside. And so listening to music is important because our mind absorbs it, and it makes things become active in that. And the most interesting story that I'm remembering him talking about there was a bunch of people who, in a sense, don't engage at all, and in a certain sense, feel they don't know anything about how to use music. And so he talked about some fellow who worked with a lot of people who are very restricted, and the way that he helped them be more vital in their life was, he'd say, you play the trumpet, you play the trombone, I'll play the violin. And he'd get all these people starting to do that, and they would learn how to do it, and all of a sudden he had a little orchestra that, you know, and they were active and they could engage with it. So I think that's a very interesting dimension. And then the dancing, even if you don't think you can dance, his point was, get out there and move around with somebody else, you know, get involved with other people. So I think that that is some of the elements, because I think as we, you know, for myself, as we get older, we can get more sedative, you know, we're just sitting, watching, maybe just sitting, reading. And especially, you know, priests, I think probably all of us priests, we're living by ourselves. You know, we're not living in a community. So we have to go out from where we are because we don't have other people that are milling around with us all the time as people in a family are doing. So those are a couple of thoughts that, and you just have to go out and do it. You know, it was part of it. Just do it. You know, do something, and something will hook you, move you on, and you'll get more engaged. And don't worry about the fact that you're not remembering everything and it's all coming back and you're in charge and you know everything. Allow yourself to absorb it, allow yourself to relax and to try. So just some thoughts.
You know what I think is a real positive thing? I started to do it frequently about a month and a half ago, and that is to be thankful and then try to imagine all of the things that you're thankful for, and you get into places that I never expected to. Negative things, hurts, those kinds of things, and you say thank you for them, and you begin to find wonderful good things when sometimes pain or suffering or abuse occurs. That's it really turned things around for me and helped me think more clearly about, you know, this age and the things that are happening to us.
I was, it was interesting, Bob, your comment, because I had dinner last Sunday with my music director in my parish that I just retired from. And in the course of the thing, I said to him, you know, music's kind of a gap in my life. I mean, I like music and enjoy it. And like in seminary, I sang in the choir, but I can't sing alone. I can start off great, but if I lose the note, it's hell to get it back. And so I said, have you ever experienced anyone who's 80 years old and, for example, learns to play the piano for the first time? And he said he thought it was a fantastic idea, not only because it would, you know, sharpen your sensitivity to sound and music, but it would demand that you learn a kind of coordination that you hadn't learned before, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, I can resonate exactly with what you said, but the other thing I'm trying to get at is, do we have a kind of insight into human life, how people grow, how they flourish, etc., or don't, that we can share with other people? I mean, do we have a perspective on the world that is different because we're older?
I think so.
And because we've thought about it. I mean, you can be older and, you know, have never done anything other than look at television all day.
Right.
But, you know, we've all had enormous, incredible experiences with people and seen people at their best, seen them at their worst. Is there a gift of insight that's given to older people that is able to offer benefit to the larger community? Or is that a kind of an old man's arrogance?
I know.
I don't know.
I was going to say, I think there's a kind of wisdom that does seep in, you know, because of it. But it's because, as you said, because we live our lives and we reflect on our lives.
Mm.
We've been doing it all the time, you know. And I know one of my prayers is always for more clarity, so I can understand more and more. I still don't understand totally myself. But at the same time, I think, I know when I preach now, I preach, I sort of preach the same stuff, but there's just a different, I just preach differently than I used to.
Yeah.
I think it just because I think what you're saying is, you get to this point in your life, you do have some perspective, and now I think about people that I'm looking at on television, you know, or these politicians, and realize that, God, I could be there, you know, and I just understand people who have their own opinions. I just have them more in perspective than I used to. I don't put them on a I just said, well, this is one person's opinion. You know, I don't know what else to say, but I think there is kind of a wisdom that comes, at least for people, I think everybody here who thinks and reflects. I think it's one of the advantages of being 80, I suppose, and not having to go through all the crap that you see young people getting into, saying, thank God I'm beyond that now. Someone told me one time, he says, you know, you're getting older when faced with the choice of two temptations, you choose the one that gets you home the earliest.
You know,
Frank, a couple things I'd add. We have a priest here. He's a good 5 years ahead of me. I'm going to turn 82 in March. Dave Rhodes is his name. He's of German heritage. He was our chancellor for a good time, and then he was pastor of a couple of the big parishes, and he retired several years ago. He's remained active. He plays the piano every day, and he has somebody come in to coach him every week. He keeps working to keep his ability to play the piano and get better at it. He still invests himself in that. And then I have another friend. There's a couple over in Canfield that I got to know when I was helping at a parish, and she is of Swedish heritage, and her husband is Irish, and they're academics. They grew into academics and doing their things. And she's written several books, and I'm sure she's older than I am, and he is older than she is. And they're very active. He plays, you know, what do they call the big thing where you have to hold it up here and you run the thing here. That's what he plays.
Cello.
Yeah, and she can play the violin. She plays the piano. She does the liturgies in a lot of churches. She's writing her books. You know, and then I have another friend who taught English for a long time. He had a family of, I think, 11 kids, and they all turned out to be homeschooled because he not only was a professor at a university, but he educated his kids at home, and now he's educating his grandkids. So they're not going to school, but they're terribly active, and they're scattered all over the country. And he is still very alert, and he writes regular poetry and publishes things. He plays music with, they have a group of his kids that are still in the area, and they'll play in the Youngstown area. They'll go over in Pittsburgh and do that. So I think there's a lot that if you stay active and engaged and wanting to grow yourself, once you turn 80 and once you turn 90, you just keep doing the best you can. And I think more and more stuff pops. I can't remember a lot of stuff, but all of a sudden it's back and pop. You know? So I think that's part of it.
Would the world lose something really important if all of the 80-year-olds suddenly died?
Yes.
What would that be?
Oh, it would be a great deal of wisdom that is buried.
Yeah.
Why is it buried? That's Frank asked the question. Is there something that we know that we have learned that can be shared? Do you see in society a lot of sharing by people our age as to, here are some insights we have? And if you see that sharing, I'm curious to know where it is. So I don't know what the repository of our knowledge has become. I mean, where is our knowledge and insight going? Is it going into programs for the younger people? Is it going into some, whatever are we making to share that? I mean, you occasionally have, if those of us have kids, you try to share with your kids who are in their 50s.
Yeah, well, it would depend on your circumstance. I mean, for me to be in preaching, I've got a funeral on Monday. In fact, next week I've got a funeral. I'm going to be coming down to Southern California because I have a cousin who died, and that's kind of how I share it. I mean, I mean, you share it with your kids or your grandkids or with people that you know?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it just depends on your circumstance. Fred does it in his classes. You know?
It would seem to me, Tim, that if we're keeping ourselves alive and active, and even though we're kind of on the decline, but it pops back at different points in time if we're in conversation, if we're being social and being with others. And so if it's only with, let's say with your the group that you're a part of, Tim, so you share something that they pick up, and then they pick it up with their children and maybe with their grandchildren, and there's a wisdom that gets passed down. So it's not like it's captured in us or captured someplace out there that isn't affecting people. And who knows when people will get the point. Just as an example, I'm not sure it's a good one, but if you guys watch football and you know what happened with the Bills and the Pittsburgh Steelers,
The
game was
Bengals.
stopped. Pardon?
Yeah, the Bengals. You mean
No, the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, and against the Bengals.
Oh, you're right. This thing,
Yeah.
yes, it happened. Correct. Thank you. But he's from Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
Guy he was flat out. If you were
DeMar.
watching the game, you just saw he just dropped. And he's a young guy, 24 years old. But he carried into himself and went through Catholic school, incidentally. But already as a young guy, 24 years old, he's got a wisdom about him that other people are picking up. And so he's highly appreciated. One of the things that he did is he started a toy thing for children in his area. And he's in a suburb of Pittsburgh. And his coach just had marvelous things to say about him. And what was happening with all of his fellow players when he got floored, and they could see it was the worst flooring that probably most of them have ever seen on the football field. They were crying. These big, strong guys were crying. And they all gathered around to pray. So I think that even at that age, there's a wisdom that he has absorbed from someplace. And that trickles out and trickles down. And, we may not be famous because somehow it's radiated from us, but it has. And wisdom is radiated into us, it seems to me.
We've been doing this every week, with maybe one or two exceptions, every week for 2 years. And none of us were intending to do this when we first started. It was just kind of a nice get together. Let's try, try meeting on Zoom once in a while or something like that. Or started with Ned and myself, and started at Ned's initiative and calling me. But, there's a lot that has happened in our lives, enriching our lives and our relationships by the fact that we are in this kind of communication for 2 years. I think we're being intensely relational with one another. And, a lot of sharing, and I also think a lot of byproduct. We go from this conversation, I can't think of a better word to call it, but we go from this back into the rest of our lives. I would suspect each one of us enriched in the way that we deal with others and the way that we share with others, the way we mentor, and perhaps are still mentored by others as a result of what we're doing here. In some ways discernment is happening here. In some ways, you know, Tim, your Cursil group is enriched by you, by what happens here, by our sharing. And they in turn are, you know, there's a lot of energy going forth here. One last thought that I have on this is I have found, and this is one of my liturgical principles. What is really valuable is usually a byproduct of what you really are doing. There was an old book called Liturgy Needs Community Needs Liturgy. And I've always felt if you want to develop a good Christian community, concentrate on liturgy. If you want to develop good liturgy, concentrate on the quality of your community. And it's a hard thing to grasp, but I think if we're really sensitive, there are a lot of byproducts of what we're doing that are perhaps more significant than the particular things that we're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tim, I ever since you brought this up, 40 minutes ago or whatever it was, I've been listening to your comments just to try to understand the level of language and diction you use. And you don't, not that I'm an authority, I'm not, but you do not sound to me like somebody who is senile at all.
Not a bit. Not a bit. Not a
Thank
bit.
you, George. Thank you,
and,
George.
And one recognizes it when people do some sort of conversational flub that shows they missed something, or and I haven't seen that in you at all.
Yeah, that's just in the context, Tim, of your saying that you're declining and you're forgetting and that kind of stuff. Doesn't sound like it at all.
No.
You certainly haven't shown any of the well-known. I started to say autistic. Now, what's the word? Alzheimer-ish.
Yeah. Okay.
Mistakes.
But the other thing
Okay.
I would add is that you you really have the gift of having questions occur to you that you ask us.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
That's, I think,
Yeah.
nobody among all of us do that as much as you.
Yeah.
Well, I figure that's out of ignorance or naivete. Maybe that's
No.
where they come from.
No.
Yeah.
No, but a real question.
To some degree, maybe, Tim, but it's also out of creativity.
Exactly. You have an inquisitive mind.
It's usually not out of ignorance and naivete, because there are never questions that you can answer yes or no.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, the other thing I wanted to say to you,
There's stimuluses to
yeah,
conversation,
yeah.
stimuli.
The other thing I wanted to say was I think, and maybe Bob, you heard this in your talk from that Alzheimer's fellow, generally people who are developing dementia or Alzheimer's aren't even aware of it. You're not aware of it at all. I mean, that's what I've heard anyway, that when you think about what you're doing, and correctly, because I don't know, I just think I read this somewhere that you're not even aware that you're becoming that way.
I've known some people who really are aware.
Okay.
And it's a tremendous cross, because they are aware that something cognitively is slipping away from them and they can't articulate it. Being aware of it and being able to articulate it are two different things.
Do you guys remember, has anybody read Flowers for Algernon?
Oh my God.
Way back.
Way back, yeah. But there's a really,
I remember seeing that movie, Ned. with Al Kroll, no less. And oh my God.
Well,
Oh
there's
my God.
in the book, there's a description. It's about a guy with a mental disability who finds himself, I can't remember the circumstance, becoming increasingly bright.
He was a subject of research.
Great, yeah, wonderful memory, making relationships where no one else could see relationships, just became an absolutely brilliant man. And then at some point,
and was enjoying it, and
yeah.
it was, people recognized it.
Yeah.
He won awards.
And then at some point, he begins to decline. And the descriptions of his consciousness, seeing all of that wonderful ability that he had, diminish slowly. And it's just as George was saying, oh my God, the description is really amazing. And I too know folks. One of my neighbors just passed away a couple of days ago. He was a musician in a symphony orchestra, and he would say, I know that I don't know what I used to know, you know, and I can't go into those bags and pull stuff out to help me understand. So it's
So what I read was not, maybe I misread what I read. So maybe I better check myself out.
Well, and people are far more educated people, and professionals are far more examining their mental lives as we age and asking that question. You know, look at Tim here. So maybe they didn't used to recognize it, and now they do, or we do.
I would like to go back to Tom's comment about what this group has been. And it goes back to the idea that we mutually mediate each other. In other words, we help each other become ourselves. And it just happens automatically because we are by nature social beings. But there's this tremendous ideology of individualism that's touted so highly, but what happens every week here in this group is really what it's all about, I think, and that's why it's so attractive to us.
And you know what? If we tried to do that, if we had that as our goal, to mediate one another, we would screw it up so bad and we would destroy it. That's what I mean about the byproduct.
I think that's right. Yeah.
The byproduct of this group is so important and life-giving, and we all recognize it. But I think if we tried to do that, if that was our goal, to get together every week, so these guys really need me, and you know, all that kind of stuff, well, you know, we'd destroy it. We wouldn't last for a week.
Good point. Good point.
So
let's
just enjoy one another.
And on that note, if you guys want to come over for dinner, I am roasting a Boston butt. You know, slow cooking the Boston butt. So you're welcome to come for dinner if you want.
Thank you.
What's a Boston butt? Speaking on the ignorance of the left coast.
Oh, is that just a Southern term, a Boston butt? It's a roast. I think it's from the shoulder of a pig. It's pork. It's a shoulder of a pig, and it's what
pork shoulder butt. You can buy it at Costco.
That's right. Yeah, and in the South, it is the common piece of meat that you slow roast 6 or 7 hours, and then you rip it apart for your barbecue pork sandwiches.
Shredded pork, exactly.
Oh, pulled pork.
Why do you call it Boston?
I do not know that, but that's when you go to the store, it's got Boston
Well,
butt on it.
Well,
You know,
it's at least not another part of the pig, so anyway.
no,
Boston, the phrase means something different.
Yeah.
it might be. Anyway, and so guys, it's been a wonderful, wonderful gathering, and I'm going to look into that Ignatian
Yeah,
Yeah.
process. And so is
that's the.
it James Martin the guy I should
Yeah.
look at first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll
There's
do that.
also
Okay,
another guy, Tim,
Jesuit guide to almost everything.
okay.
Thank you.
We
These
did not
guys-
start with a prayer. Should we end with a prayer?
Yeah, please.
Anybody
let's-
have
Yes.
a prayer?
Please.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
Full of grace.
The
Lord
Lord
is with you.
is with you.
Blessed
Blessed
art
are
thou
you
amongst
among
women,
women,
And
and
blessed
blessed
is
is
the
the fruit
of
Jesus.
thy womb, Jesus.
Holy
Holy
Mary,
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 Mother of God,
Mother of God,
for
pray for
sinners,
us
pray for us sinners,
sinners.
now
now
and
and
at the
at
hour.
the hour
Our
of
death.
Amen.
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 Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Bye, guys. Have a great
guys.
weekend.
Happy
bless
you all.
weekend.
See
See you
y'all.
next week.
And pray that the Republicans finally find a leader.
Oh, I
Yeah.
don't know. I kind of am enjoying this because they look like idiots to the whole world.
On that happy note.